Hello and welcome to Simon Says Artwork. In this video I'm going to be drawing on this small A5 black paper pad, and this is really useful for just knowing that you've already got the dark already covered, so all you've got to do is incorporate some mid-tone and some light. So okay, let's get started. Now, when it comes to doing a life drawing session, I've said many times that there are several different ways of approaching your drawing and trying to analyze the pose. And on this occasion, what I'm doing is trying to use a white pastel pencil to render the light and the shadow, the light and the mid-tone on black paper, because your shadow is covered by the black paper to a certain extent. But I begin by boxing off a literal box, a cropped image on this page by creating a mounted area around the edge. The reason for this is because the pose itself is quite abstract, and the model has chosen to do a pose where you can only see parts of her body, and that makes a really interesting study. And immediately you can see I'm just going in and shading certain areas, because instead of drawing lines, you start to see tone a lot more clearly. And I think it's a more interesting pose and study to do when you have to remove yourself from the literal form that you are analyzing, and instead you really abstract it and you take away the figurative aspects of the subject. Now, what I do is I try to shade lighter in certain areas and apply more pressure in others. The more pressure that you apply, the lighter the marks become. So the more light that's hitting a surface, the harder you want to apply pressure. Now, I do some lines to try to indicate certain areas that are I suppose, just indicating the form, the outline of the form, but not too, not so much that it becomes representational. I still would like the idea that it's abstract. So I'm simply trying to get the angles, and what I'm looking at is what's called the negative space, which is the part where the subject isn't. So if you can see the model, then you look at the parts where the model isn't, wherever you can see a small amount of background area and you can see the room behind the model. That's the negative space. That's not the subject, so it's the negative space. And that will give you some kind of an indication of how much space the model is taking up. So that's what you like to draw sometimes, is the negative space, so that you know the model is in this part and then not in that part. So the top left-hand corner is the negative space so far. And because they're so close to the camera, everything becomes a really strange, unusual image to try to understand. So a lot of your marks become far more considered and slower, because you're really trying to comprehend the shapes that you're looking at and trying to analyze. What makes this pose so interesting is because of the angles. There's a lot of diagonals and oblique angles that occur naturally when you do a pose like this and you frame yourself this way in the camera. So I'm using the eraser to cut back into certain areas that I've already marked, which is quite nice about using the white pastel pencil and even chalk on black paper, is that you can erase certain parts of it. And if you don't have an eraser, you can just use a moistened towel or tissue or rag, or if you have to, just lick the tip of your finger and rub it on, and it'll push back and erase the marks that you've made. Obviously the ideal is to not do that and just to stick with the marks that you've made, but it's all learning, so try not to beat yourself up too much about making mistakes. That happens. Now, I don't know about you, but I quite like the fact that there's an erased line and then a drawn line. There's something about that which is really nice, where there's a continuation. Even if you don't lick the tip of your finger, if you just rub your finger on the surface, if you're anything like mine, my hands are always slightly moist anyway, slightly dampened, so that's something where it will remove the strength of the tone of the pencil. So that's what I do in certain areas. I also quite like outlining certain shapes that I see that need shading in, because there's something about drawing lines around where the shadow occurs that I think looks quite nice, and I think it would look just as nice if it were in pencil as opposed to in white, if it were in the grey of a graphite pencil. All of the things that I'm drawing become more apparent, obviously, the more that I get into the drawing, which is the case with every drawing, but especially with this one, just because of how unusual this all looks, until you actually get the opportunity to start to form those shapes a lot clearer using the tricks of applying light or shadow. And as I said, the shadow in this is either trying to shade with the white pencil especially light, or it's leaving it black. I'm still getting used to how to use this, so I think I have a way to go until I am doing better images using this type of pencil. And I'm looking forward to taking more time and just making a nicer image using the same techniques, but just taking more time and attention to the detail. It often is just trying harder. Things like this where I'm just shading quite haphazardly, I think in the future, I think I'll be a lot more concentrated on how little pressure I put on. You can see that there, that little shape that I've shaded, I've put on so little pressure that it's really a grey that has been applied instead of a white. And that's what makes this pencil so useful. I think part of the problem that I face is that I don't know what type of finish I'm trying to achieve. So as I'm making a drawing, I'm making decisions and I'm criticizing my own approach and application of the tone and trying to figure out how to fix it, how to remedy certain problems, and make decisions about how I want the finish to go along the way. That is something which, with some other images, I already know. It's easier to know with pen for me because I've done a lot more with pen, and I think I find it just an easier media to use, the different types of ink, than I do with any type of pencil or paint. Still very abstract, as you can tell from the image there. You can probably see what I'm drawing. I'm not sure, maybe you can't. I can tell what it is now, but it's still very abstract by the shapes and by the angles that we're looking at. But a lot of artwork, I think, is making a mess to start off and then using these specific decisions at the end to try to heighten certain aspects of the form in order to create the illusion of 3D space. You can see how much of a difference there is when you apply pressure to this pencil. It makes everything else become very much a mid-tone range. And I'm sure there's still within that shading a whiter white that I could achieve if I were to hold the pencil upward as opposed to sideways like I am, to shade on the light. This was a online life drawing session, and I really appreciate these being held so consistently. And I'm hoping to show an improvement with how I approach each pose in the future. It does take a lot of practice, but it's not only practice, it's you have to analyze and criticize your own finish and certain decisions that you've made, and to really decide whether or not you like or don't like how you've achieved certain effects. A good question to ask is, what do you like and what don't you like about the drawing that you're doing or the painting? That's a question which I've asked to several professional artists, and I recommend you try it yourself, because when you ask that question, really pay attention to what they're telling you, because their way of analysing their own work is a really interesting way to learn how to look at your work. Because the way that they criticise themselves is what helped them improve. And if you can learn how they look at their own work, then you can start to look at your work that way and to improve upon your finish. There are some times where I don't mind a messier finish to a drawing or a pose, because that can actually add to the finish of the image. Not everything needs to be finely rendered and smoothly blended into the finish. Some things really do benefit from a rougher look to them. Not everything, and it is something where you need to learn what works and what doesn't. But sometimes things being a little bit more scratchy or abrasive in certain areas really add to the piece. It's hard to explain why. Sometimes it's just a feeling. I have a small collection of artwork on my phone which is just abstract works by people where I don't really know why I like it. I think it's something to do with the balance of the colours or the tone that they're using, but it's very abstract work, and I think it's just the combination works together really well. It's not for everyone, and some people just don't like abstract work. I actually really enjoy abstract work, but I am drawn more to figurative studies, whether it's, or figurative pieces, I should say, whether it's landscape or portrait or still life. Whatever it is, it's something where that really speaks to me. But some abstract work is something which I'd like to incorporate into my practices also. After doing a fine art course, I have learned that some people just can't teach abstract, and a lot of the tutors in the school that I attended just weren't equipped with knowledge or experience to help you understand abstract work, and instead they just tried to help you stumble upon abstraction, whereas I really wanted to discuss theory, and they won't do that. They're all about practice and not theory. By theory, what I mean is the thoughts and the motivation behind abstraction, how the piece formulates in your mind and in your emotions as you're developing it, as opposed to here's a way to make a figurative study become abstract. For example, to really zoom in on something becomes very abstract, or to use brushes that are far too large for the size of the canvas makes things abstract. There are different ways of achieving it, but I think that there's surely far more to abstract as a discipline than just making it happen by using certain materials. So that's where I'm going to leave it off on this one. You can see that it is quite an abstract piece still, but I think it's got quite a lot of charm to it, and I appreciate that pose as opposed to a lot of the normal life drawing studies that you will get on a session. Okay, that's the drawing done. Now, it was a really cropped image which the life model did, and I really like things like that because it becomes a very abstract pose, and it really works out as looking at the shapes and not looking at the actual literal study subject. I mean, so you're not so much thinking this is the stomach or this is the arm. You're more just thinking this is a line which goes here and this is a shape which happens here. That type of thing is really useful, and I think using that in life drawing is something which I always recommend people do anyway, even if it's not a cropped image and it's not obscured in any way. Just to look at things as far as light and shadow and shape and things like that really help to render certain images which are otherwise quite confusing and complicated to get done. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then please leave a like, comment down below, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell, and I will see you in the next video.